everyone. It's time to start. Before we start, I will ask you to stand up. Please stand up. We'll try to take some breath. I agree we could do better. And I think we have to say we will have maybe another conference like this in 2 years. And we will plan to have more spiritual wellness activities, because I think that part is also very important, because we receive a lot of information, and it is information that is not easy, and we know that. And we had to start somewhere. It is started now, and we are sure for in 2 years we'll have a better conference. But let's take some time to breathe, and you can do it as you want. Me, I will close my eyes and I will breathe during 1 minute. Can we make some noise? We will have this panel. This is our final panel. And the title of this panel is Mental Health of Black Communities in Canada, Perspective 2032. We could have this panel on the title of the conference, but we chose to have this panel and to try to have a perspective, like in 10 years, where we want to be. And I think it is very important. But before we start, I will ask to each panelist to present himself. Please welcome Papa Ladjiké Diouf.
Merci beaucoup, Jules, puis félicitations pour l'organisation de cet événement. Mon nom est Papa Ladjiké Diouf. Je suis psychologue et sociologue de formation. Ça fait 16 ans que je travaille comme psychothérapeute avec diverses expériences en trauma, en zone de conflit, puis également en dépendance trouble concomitant. So, je suis superviseur clinique et directeur clinique en dépendance trouble concomitant ici à Ottawa. So, et je suis le co-lead présentement, lead principal de Ottawa Black Mental Health Coalition. Merci beaucoup.
Dr. Monnica Williams.
Hi, my name is Monnica Williams. I'm the Canada Research Chair in Mental Health Disparities. I focus on mental health and the needs of communities of color, particularly Black and Indigenous communities. And I'm also doing work looking at the impact of racism on mental health care and what we can do about it.
Thank you. Kafui Sawyer.
Hi, everyone. I'm a mother. I have 3 wonderful children. I'm also a Christian. I like to acknowledge my place with my spirituality. I am also the founding chair of the Black Psychological section of the CPA. I'm a registered psychotherapist and a health consultant, as well as trauma consultant for Health Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Alicia Boatswain-Kyte.
So my name is Alicia. I am also a mother of 2 children. I am a social worker. I was practicing for 15 years before I just started to do my PhD. I'm also an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at McGill. And my area of research is youth primarily. child welfare, justice, education, and the anti-Black racism of these systems and the impacts of this on these youth.
Thank you. Dr. Régine Débrosse.
Merci. Bonjour, mon nom est Régine Débrosse. My name is Régine. I'm an assistant professor at McGill University, also at the School of Social Work. My training is actually in psychology, and I conducted a postdoctoral studies at Northwestern, where I developed an expertise in intervention, design, and programs, particularly for youth in matters that center racial identity. And I also have a line of research on community support and experiences of stigma. Thank you. Honored to be here.
From Nova Scotia, Dr. Barbara-Ann Hamilton-Hinch.
So I'm Dr. Barbara-Ann Hamilton-Hinch, and as you heard, I'm from Nova Scotia. And I like to do a shout out for those 8th-generation African Nova Scotians, and that would be one of me. So shout out to those. And my friend Danielle, who's also African Nova Scotian or African Canadian in Toronto. So shout out to her. And I say that because people have to forget about us who've been here for 8 generations when we talk about African, Canadian, Black. And our history is very different and our experience is very different. And so we don't necessarily consider ourselves, I'm supposed to introduce myself. I'm sorry. So I'm an associate professor in the School of Health and Human Performance at Dow. And that school includes kinesiology, health promotion, therapeutic rec, and recreation management. And I'm also an assistant vice provost equity and inclusion at Dow. And my research looks at the impact of racism. My PhD looked at the impact of racism on the health and well-being of women of African descent living in Nova Scotia. And I do a lot of look at institutional and structural racism, particularly around mental health and limited access to services. So a lot of school research. So the social terms of health is what I use. And some of you would have been in the presentation when I looked at the situation for individuals who are incarcerated and their lack of support when they integrate back into community. So all things Black, and primarily because I have 3 beautiful Black men, and I want to protect them and make sure that I'm making the world different for them. For if anybody comes in contact with them, they'll know that they're Barb's children, you better treat them right. So.
Dr. Regine King.
Yeah, my name is Regine King. Wibereho is my maiden name. I am originally from Rwanda. I've been in Canada for the last 22 years. Currently an associate professor at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Social Work. And my research area is I'm really very interested in actually appropriate interventions as they speak to Black people. So all Black, I have done my research only with Black people in Canada, and I want to see what can be done to best really support those who are struggling the most. My other part of interest, I do research in post-genocide in Rwanda, focusing on community-based mental health, but also on healing and forgiveness processes. And I try to see how can my 2 worlds overlap based on where I live, and really interested in indigenous knowledges and in what we can do to transform this country. Thank you.
From France, Dr. Daniel Derivois.
Merci. Et moi, je suis Daniel Derivois, comme il l'a dit. Donc, je suis psychologue clinicien et je travaille dans le champ de la protection de l'enfance, où je m'occupe d'enfants qui viennent de partout, de toute provenance géographique. Et puis, j'ai eu une formation aussi en sciences de l'éducation. Et puis, je suis professeur de psychologie et psychopathologie à l'Université de Bourgogne-Franche-Comté. Et mes centres de recherche, mes intérêts de recherche, c'est le traumatisme, la résilience et les questions identitaires. Et comme vous le savez, comme je l'ai dit ce matin, je travaille sur un modèle que j'appelle clinique de la mondialité, où j'essaye de penser justement l'ensemble des altérités de ce monde autour de ce qu'on appelle notre humanité commune. Voilà, merci.
Thank you. I want some noise for our last speaker. He's the painter we have for the painting exhibition, and he was with us during the 3 days. Please welcome Banks St-Fleur.
Comme Jude le dit, je suis banque St-Fleur. Je commence comme ça. Il voulait publier un livre. Il a été à ma maison et c'est mon atelier. Il a dit, je veux cette peinture pour être sur mon livre. Et puis, depuis, à chaque fois qu'il a une présentation, il m'appelle pour l'accompagner. Et je me suis rendu compte dans toutes les présentations que je peins l'humanité en soi. Je peins les problèmes mentaux des hommes. La première fois que j'ai rencontré professeur Derivois, j'ai vu qu'il y avait un contact avec lui, mais je ne l'ai jamais écouté. C'est ce matin que je me suis rendu compte que je dépeins tout ce qu'il veut dire en peinture.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. He said about this story. Maybe I can say some words. I was in his workshop and I saw that painting and I said, "Oh, I want this for my book. I want it to be like the cover page of my book." And I read him the painting also, and I call it postural resilience, because there were like a lot of traumatic things in the painting, but also you can see resilience. And I think it is like a word that we don't hear too much during the conference, and we have also to celebrate our resilience as Black people. Let me say some words about what we will do. There is a first question, and for the first question, there is just 1 minute per panelist. And after this, we will take 5 questions in the room, and the 5 questions is 1 minute question, a really 1 minute question, and then there will be a first discussion during among the panelists, and then we will have a second question. The first question is, in your respective fields, what 3 gaps or challenges have you observed regarding the mental health of Black people in Canada? And we will start this time again with Papa Ladjiké Diouf.
En ce qui me concerne, moi, je suis dans Addiction and Mental Health, puis j'ai l'opportunité aussi d'être à des tables stratégiques pour ça. Mais ce que je me rends compte, c'est que la plus grande barrière qu'on a pour nos communautés, c'est l'accès. L'accès est la plus grande barrière. Et quand je parle d'accès, il y a un aspect interne à l'accès qui est relié à nos communautés, mais il y a aussi un aspect institutionnel et systémique. Et c'est cet aspect-là qui est le plus gros pour moi. Donc, pour dire que la chose à laquelle on doit s'attaquer aujourd'hui, c'est ce stigma systémique. C'est comme ça que je l'appelle. Il y a un stigma systémique autour de l'accès à des services adaptés, culturellement adaptés pour nos communautés.
Thank you. Dr. Monnica Williams?
Yeah, well, I think you said it all there. So certainly I think access is a problem for all Black people. It's actually a problem for everyone in Canada, to be honest, but for Black people, it's doubly so for a multitude of reasons, including not being able to find Black providers, not being able to find any providers who've had culturally informed training, and the cost of mental health care, which is not covered by provincial plans. And so the barriers just mount and mount. And in addition, mental health literacy, our community's understanding of mental health problems and how to address them. So on that, I'll stop there. I could just really talk about this all day.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The 3 gaps I see are education, The issues around education. I actually, as a therapist, came to find out a lot about my own history of psychology and understanding the challenges that we face through Dr. Williams, actually. Ended up doing some research, had the opportunity to do that with her, and came to find out that our education system hovers around the knowledge of the white person. And one of the things I think I never knew was that an educational psychologist called Dr. Terman, you can read about him, in 1916, came out with a really nonsense article about the fact that Black people cannot learn abstractions. We can only be manual laborers. So when you think about such a history in psychology, can you imagine how that impacted your education and my education? We were not encouraged to go to school and do things just like the white person. We were only told that our role was actually taking care of our children and not getting educated. So that is a system that had continued for a very long time. I did not know that. So when you think about how we got to where we are, it's not that we don't want to learn. I really think we want to learn. I think the system were actually put in place to make us not thrive. And so now that we're more educated, we can actually get into different ways of being and educate our own children. So education for me is key, because if you take a look at the people who get to be at the top, they're always well educated. So when you think about that, I think that's a really good place to start. And I think I'll just leave it there. I probably didn't fill up all the gaps, but I think education for me is number one. Thank you.
So, okay. Wait, I'll be more comfortable. So in my discipline, I think the challenges that we face, and I teach social work students coming in, and the curriculum is problematic. We are teaching them how to reform, rehabilitate, and we're not teaching them how to dismantle, transform, and change. We're ignoring collective responses to this issue. We have a very narrow definition of what it means. What is mental health? I don't even think the term mental health is our language. And we're not using or saying things like, or teaching them about what it means for us to experience Black fatigue, Black grief, and incorporating that into our curriculum. And so the challenges, I would say, is what we are teaching these future social workers as they leave the university and intervene with what is a very vulnerable population.
Thank you. So I work a lot in the area of youth programs, and I would say in youth programs, Black youth are seen in a lot of ways, but in mostly three ways. I could say four, but I will say for now, mostly three ways. One, they are very much invisible in the sense that a lot of programs don't even acknowledge race or cater to them specifically. And then the programs that do often come off with assumptions that Black youth are dangerous, that they are future or current members of street gangs, that they use guns, or that they are at risk. And if you ask people at risk of what, nobody can tell you at risk of what. There's just an assumption that they're associated with risks. And so I would say the three gaps that I see is one, the need for more culturally relevant programs. Two, the need for programs that value and nurture youth's autonomy rather than being programs that exist really to almost like park youth in a place where they can be controlled and surveilled. And three, an acknowledgement that Black youth, yes, are facing a lot of risks in some ways, but are also showing a lot of strength and resilience in ways that are underappreciated. And again, that could be highlighted, but also nurtured. And I think if these three gaps were addressed, we would not just prevent some mental health issues in the Black community, we would be able to have many more Black youth and eventually Black people who would be able to really thrive and flourish.
I am going to stick to the question, and that's why I wrote it down. So for me, coming from a perspective of both a researcher and living in Nova Scotia, the need for race-based data, and that's been talked about. And I know we're really pushing it in Nova Scotia, and we're getting ready to actually start getting it collected through our MSI. So we are getting ready to test the waters and see how much trust we can have. But in order to really identify and support our Black communities, we need to understand who's in our Black communities. And we often seem invisible as Black people, even though we have a very large Black population. It does include our African Caribbean and African Nova Scotian. We're still very much so invisible. The need for funding to support Black researchers and Black research. And so you may have some Black researchers that aren't doing Black research, but they still need to be supported. And we need to call out the Tri-Council on their anti-Black racism when it comes to funding. Many of us have to go outside of the Tri-Council to get funding for our research. And we shouldn't have to have a separate call in order for us to get supported or funded. Our research should be counted and the rest of the research that is going on within this country. We also know there's structural and institutional racism when it comes to publications. We shouldn't have to fight for publications as Black researchers. That's the reason why so much isn't out there about what we are doing, what we're living, and what we're experiencing. We appreciate of those who have been able to successfully get published, but we know when many of us still publish on favorable topics, it doesn't always get published. And so we really need to change that as well. And working closely with Dr. Dryden, looking at changing the curriculum. With the Black Health Education Collaborative, we're working on changing the curriculum in medicine and eventually in the other faculties of health. So those are some of the gaps, again, looking at curriculum. So thank you for that time.
I see three gaps. I think the biggest for me is the lack of policies and structured programs that pay attention to the humanity in Black people. My second one is the lack of data. I think we have been crying out to get really this information collected so that we know how we are doing in terms of how many people are we helping, how many of them fall through the cracks, how many are dying, how many are thriving. I think that information is needed in every sector of the different aspects of our lives. The last one is the lack of well thought through anti-racist interventions to assist those who are struggling. Thank you.
Voilà, donc pour moi, moi je n'ai pas d'expertise directe sur le Canada, mais je lis beaucoup de choses sur ce qui se passe. Ce que je peux dire comme obstacle, le premier, c'est la question de l'ethnocentrisme, y compris l'ethnocentrisme inversé. Vous savez que c'est l'une des choses les plus partagées au monde, cette idée à tout à voir le monde selon le prisme culturel, son propre prisme culturel. Je pense que ça peut être tout à fait un obstacle. Et un deuxième obstacle que je vois, qui vaut à la fois pour le Canada, mais je pense que pour l'Europe aussi, c'est la falsification de l'histoire. On ne connaît pas l'histoire et cette falsification de l'histoire est entretenue par des médias et des courants et certains courants politiques. Et là, je pense que c'est vraiment un obstacle majeur. Et puis, troisième obstacle, c'est un manque de recherche. Alors là, je pense surtout à ce qui se passe ou ce qui ne se passe pas en France, en Europe. Il y a un manque de recherche justement sur ces questions-là qui entraîne aussi un manque de formation pour les professionnels les professionnels du social, du socio-judiciaire qui interviennent auprès des jeunes et des familles, etc. Voilà.
Ma réponse serait deux volets. Premièrement, je suis peintre naïf abstrait. Si vous aviez vu l'exposition, Par exemple, dans ce coin-là, il y avait une peinture en bleu qui montrait deux mains menottées. Et il y a comme un trou au milieu, et puis en haut, il y avait une main avec un crayon, une plume là-dedans. Pour moi, c'est tellement symbolique. En Amérique du Nord, ce qu'ont fait les Noirs et puis les Premières Nations sont les quantités, les quantités en pourcentage les moindres, mais pourtant ils sont les plus en prison. Mais si on veut enlever ces menottes, je partage l'idée, on doit passer par l'éducation. Et quand on arrive avec ce crayon en main, on va arriver à quelque chose, et quelle que soit la catégorie.
First round, questions from the public or sharing? Like you can share things, you can ask questions. Alicia.
Bonjour à tous. Merci, Dr. Derivois, pour oui, juste la mention de notre histoire. But I just also want to say that, you know, we heard on day one about the fact that it's important for folks to have anti-racism training. I would like to encourage the support of African history, of Black Canadian history, of our ancestral history, also as part of that curriculum. Because in the spirit, thank you, because in the spirit of Sankofa, if you think of the Sankofa bird, which is very much part of our history, the bird its feet is going forward, but it's looking back and picking up a nugget. It's to return and get it. It doesn't stop us from still moving forward. So I just feel that when we talk about anti-racism, it's great. But if you don't know from where it comes and celebrate the fact that we are descendants of kings and queens, and coming from that perspective. So I just wanted to add, it's not a question, just a comment. We need to maintain the spirit of Sankofa when we're thinking of culturally appropriate programs, just to add that. That's my minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for your presentations. This is in response to Barbara, what you said about, is the Tri-Council related to shirk? Okay, then I'm definitely gonna back that up. I'll try to keep it to a minute. So in our dealings with the Ottawa Police, we found out they'd hired a very problematic researcher who had done some problematic research. So you went to the police first and took her problematic report and said, hey, look at this. And they're like, that's why we hired her. And we're like, what the? So then we filed a complaint with the Carleton Research Ethics Board, and they went, hey, she's great. And we're like, and then she'd gotten $200,000 from Shirk. So he went to Shirk and filed a complaint, and they also went, she's great. And so we're going to follow up, because I then did like a quick search on Shirk's database for things like research on abolition, on defund, nothing. But there was, even just by the titles, there's some really problematic police research. Then I found somebody sent me a paper from a sister who basically did a research on the gatekeeping of research on police. And so, yes, and we'll be chasing after Shirk.
Seulement, savez-vous qu'il n'y a presque aucun artiste noir qui peut présenter ses expositions dans aucune grande institution ici? Il y a maintenant un seul qui est à Montréal, Manuel. Les Noirs, chaque fois qu'on présente ou bien on répond à un appel, qu'est-ce qu'ils nous disent? Ils n'acceptent pas ces genres de peinture.
I think this is a question for specifically those that are teaching social workers. I find that there's quite a problem, and I think it was mentioned around the curriculum for our social work programs, and even for Black social workers that we do try to hire to work with our Black communities, you know, the historical issues and that are still there. So can you comment on how we can work to really transform the education of social workers, because they do have such an impact on all of us?
Everyone can hear me? Yeah, okay. So social work is so problematic. I don't know why I'm a social worker, to tell you the truth. But here I am, and I think what I try to bring is that we as Black people have been erased. Social work is something that is so innate. It is us caring for others, social justice, community. This is social work, but the professionalization of it has been one that has completely wiped us out. I think there are things that are changing, but yes, the curriculum is extremely problematic. We don't name Blackness, and I try to. So luckily, I'm so blessed actually, because I do have colleagues at the School of Social Work at McGill. And this is like, we are 6 Black professors. Cindy David up there is another one. And I can tell you that having Black bodies in this space is one way of bringing Blackness into the classroom, because we name it, we speak it, and we're trying in some of our own ways to provide examples of social work. And the students come, I'm going to go on, but the students come in wanting to help. And we kind of say how dangerous it is to want to help without understanding. And I think that what we need is some type of like ethics. Like, how do you practice ethically? And I think that one of the things we have to, or what we're trying to do at our school, and that we can now have the capacity to do because we have the faculty, is to speak to that ethical practice with Black communities, and use curriculum, change curriculum. And we have the latitude to do so, whether we have, and luckily we have the support, I think, of our department, but we can also, I feel saddened for my other colleagues across other schools of social work who might not have that latitude, because the academy is not, opening its door to challenging and dismantling, right? So it is a very, I think, precarious thing that we are trying, that some faculty are trying to do, but having more Black faculty, I think, is one way in terms of bringing that and changing curriculum.
Can I add, as another person who teaches in social work? You asked a very powerful question, because I think, and many of you may be asking yourself, what do these people do in academia if they don't teach these things? I will tell you, when I was hired at the University of Calgary, someone who had been a long-term secretary in my faculty, I met her at a public function. She's almost like 90. She was like, oh, so you came to replace Dave. Those who know Dr. David Estee had been in our faculty for 25 years, was retiring in 2 years. I got hired, and for too many people, they imagined that I just was hired to replace him, because we can't be 2 in one institution so that we can shout together. So now we are, after he left, we are 3. But so I'm presenting, these are challenges that I don't hide, because I share them even within my own university. So we are now 3. So for about 4 or 5 years, we just wanted to teach an anti-colonial, anti-racist course. We couldn't. So provided this, created a series of workshops to do with the community. That went very well. We asked it to teach that course with the community in the classroom. We were told that unless we raise the funds to teach the course, there was no money. So, but I want to tell you, maybe this speaks to the struggle that needs to be continued. Now we are teaching 3 courses. We are teaching the anti-colonial, anti-racist course. We are teaching for the second time the Afrocentric perspectives in social work. And we are teaching a critical race theory in social work, all due to the work we put in when after the killing of George Floyd, and everyone was like, oh, no, it doesn't happen here. What can we do? We're like, let's teach these courses. let's do the anti-Black racism task force. And we are using that task force to almost like push the work that have always been in the making, but you couldn't make it into written documents, approved courses that could be taught. And for the first time, we are going to have those courses as required courses in our BSW. So is it easy? No. Is it to anybody who is graduating from social work or any other school for that matter? I think we need to be reminded that if you are given a platform, use it. Use it. That's it.
Thank you. I'll be really quick, but I'm going to make this a general question. So a theme throughout this last few days was that, yes, the Institute is dropping, but somehow between academia and frontline service workers that are doing the work, there's a gap. So my question as we think 10 years forward is what commitments as mainly doctors in academia on the stage, how are you going to commit to helping bridge the gap between what's happening in frontline community social service and academia?
Hi. So my question might be part of the next section, but I'll ask it anyway, and it's kind of related to the last speaker. I'm wondering, we talked about previously the failure to thrive, or the thrive, being able to thrive, and the socioeconomic impacts that Black people face in terms of being in lower income classes. And we know the importance of social work. So by having this barrier in the institution that you need a BSW to be a social worker, already now we're creating a barrier for Black people to be able to enter that profession and help their people. And those people who choose to get a 2-year diploma or a BSW, there's not enough value placed on this very important role. And you're basically that's the salaries that social workers, frontline staff are getting in Toronto, Ottawa. It is not a salary that they can thrive on. So now we have this problem where we need Black practitioners, but we're not willing to pay them a salary that it is going to attract people to that field or keep them there. So what is the role in academia to influence policy to make sure that we are paying our social service workers a living wage so they do not have the mental health impacts because they're facing food insecurity and the very same issues they're trying to counsel people about?
Maybe I will say, keep in mind that two questions, and you will speak each on the questions and this question also. What are the three main areas that public health authorities, governments at different levels, and Black communities themselves should address to bring about a significant improvement in the mental health of Black communities in Canada by 2032? We will start that time here.
Thank you. What a big question. I will make a modest contribution. So in terms of the government, I think it has started, but I think there's definitely a need for more initiatives that are funded by the government and that come from the community and from Black practitioners. That's definitely a theme. I don't think it's only connected with research programs. I think on the ground, some programs also need to have more folks from the Black community that are designing them and thinking them for our people. That's definitely a big need. I think in terms of the communities, I know that there is right now some infighting within some community organizations, and some of it has to do with generations and people passing the mantle and different takes. Some of it has to do with different intersectional Black experiences. Black experiences can look really different if people have recently arrived or have been here for 8 or 9 generations, if they are straight, or if they identify with the LGBTQIA2S community, if they're young, if they're old, etc. So I think the community itself needs to have more conversations so that when this funding does get there, there needs to be enough for everyone, and people need to I wonder if there needs to be a change in mentality about how we address the issues. What I've seen is a lot of people are disappointed that funding goes in one place or another place, when really the problem is that there's not enough funding for all of us. And when it's a type of situation where all hands on deck would be helpful, rather than saying that only one approach is mandated. So that's where I would start this discussion.
Barb?
Sure. I love being with my brothers and sisters because you're all giving this roundabout way. So this question is like number 3, and I want to address how to bridge the gap between academic and frontline. I think that's a very important question that builds into the different levels of government, because most of our institutions are funded by government. And so we do have to think about, especially when we think about our placements. So for me as an academic, I try to work with a lot of the racialized students, particularly the Black students, and use my contacts to make sure my Black students are employed and are successful. And when they have issues of racism as clinicians during their placements, I address those issues. I don't leave it up to them to address it, because they shouldn't have to. And our students don't have a place to go when they experience racism as clinicians and as students, because they're trying to just do their placement. And when I think about some of the other things, I think I enjoyed listening to Kwame McKenzie, and that we need a policy around racism and race policy, and we need a part of the department that just looks at anti-Black racism. Another thing that I like to share is that we need to, as a government, we need to stop allowing the government in different levels to criminalize mental health. In order to get support for mental health, the police have to be involved. And I say that sitting here as a mother who had a child who was struggling. And I literally went to the hospital and said, hey, can you just check out my child? He's having some issues. And I said, no, you can't admit your child. So I said, okay, what are we gonna do? So we go home, and I just had to coach him. But watching that criminalization, watching the police come to my house, watching my child have to get support because he was having a little bit of a psychotic episode, but that has since passed. But just criminalizing young children or anybody in order to get services needs to stop within our government. And we need to really focus on anti-Black racism. I don't want to be part of a multicultural framework. I want to be part of an anti-Black racism framework, but we get so subsumed under multicultural and wanting to be all inclusive. And I say that sitting here as an AVPEI, but I can tell you that looking at the issues of people of African descent and anti-Black racism is a priority of mine. And I think that we need to get our government to continue to make that a priority. We know we've been here for a long time as Black people, both African, Caribbean, Black, and it had to take George Floyd's death in the US for people to realize that Black people have been here and been fighting for a long time. And that needs to stop. We shouldn't have to depend on the US to inform what happens in Canada.
Definitely, we can do what we do or get anywhere without funding. People who have their hands on where the money comes from, they need to advocate for sustainable funding. Not just, I'm doing some kind of literature review on those promising practices. And what is coming out is that they will fund only a project, you pilot test it, and then it ends there. So nobody will ever pick it up and develop it and scale it up and put it into practice with people who are supposed to be using it. So funding for me will be number one. Number two, definitely those of us who are in academia, and I think that speaks to the question that was asked, is that we need to keep pushing, teaching the history of Black people in Canada. We need to develop our own database because the majority of the work we try to do, we are mostly drawing on the American work. And Canadians are so good at telling themselves that they have nothing in common with America. The last piece I wanted to share, of course, it has been really very inspiring to see inspired people, but also motivated people who are very present here. We can do without the participation of all Black people. Sometimes you go to these communities and they tell you that it's not my business. It becomes their business when their child is handicapped at school and they don't know where to do. I think if we need to be advocating for equal pay, if we need to be advocating for the police to stop the criminalization of our people, I think we need to show up in the masses and to demand that. But also we need to go into the centers of power. I don't know how many of you are on the governance board of an organization that serves people. Because my first experience trying to help an organization was me being able to sit on a board of that organization and then to realize that the executive director, who happened to be African, was only making 40,000 when I was actually making that amount of money as a case manager. And he had been in the same organization for more than 20 years at the time. So we need to have access to that information to be able to challenge it. So we need to be present in those areas. When there is a meeting at the city hall, we want to see Black people who are present there. When we go for a match, we need to, but at the same time, those of us, I guess, who have the privilege to be in academia, one thing I'm challenging myself is just to spend time in the community, because there are people who need that little bit of push to feel like the affairs of this country are their affairs. So we need to make it our affairs.
Thank you.
Ces 3 points. Le premier, c'est essayer de sortir de la vision binaire. On parle beaucoup de noir et de blanc, mais on oublie qu'on fait porter aussi le poids de l'histoire sur ceux qu'on appelle les métis. Ça fait des dégâts. Hein. Il y a beaucoup de personnes, justement, qui se décolorent la peau, qui prennent des risques pour leur santé dans la Caraïbe, mais aussi dans des pays africains, un peu partout. Et là, c'est parce qu'on est enfermé aussi dans cette vision binaire du monde. Comment on peut faire pour sortir de là? Deuxième point, je dirais investir dans l'éducation dès le berceau pour les bébés, les enfants. Bien entendu, il faut continuer le travail au niveau universitaire, nous autres qui sommes adultes, au niveau des adolescents qui sont en pleine reconstruction identitaire, mais investir aussi dès le berceau, parce qu'un bébé qui naît ne fait pas de différence de domination. C'est petit à petit dans l'école, dans la société, qui va apprendre ces stigmatisations, ces référentiels erronés. N'oubliez pas, ceux qui nous gouvernent aujourd'hui ont aussi été bébés. Hein. Il faut s'interroger sur le moment, à partir de quel moment ils ont été pris dans cette machine infernale. Et puis, troisième point, faire des recherches sur l'histoire globale. Nous avons tous des histoires personnelles, individuelles, par groupe, par pays, mais nous sommes tous interconnectés au niveau des histoires globales. Et ça, c'est très important. Et il faut qu'on mobilise différents chercheurs qui viennent de partout, avec des perceptions différentes, pour arriver à trouver un terrain d'entente. Voilà les 3 grands axes que je pourrais dégager en 1 minute. Hein, j'ai tenu. Hein.
Je suis dans l'art et je reste dans l'art. Si vous aviez vu l'exposition, si vous étiez là-bas, vous pouvez voir par exemple que je représente tout ça avec 2 pieds qui supporte le cerveau. Je ne sais pas si vous l'aviez vu, si vous avez compris ce que ça dit. On ne pense plus avec la tête. Quand on se réfère au noir, je m'excuse, on pense avec les pieds. Et je reste là.
So I don't have faith in public health authorities to address this issue. I think that the system is, operating as it's intended to operating. And just to mention the question about salary income, there's no incentive, I think, for us or for government to create economic parity for those frontline social service workers, right? So it's really just how can we pay them the minimum to get the job done. So I don't think that we can go through that route. As an academic, I fully embrace the fact that the answers are already there and they're in community. So I have seen community do incredible work. And I think that they are doing that work that needs to be done. And I see my role as an academic as a way to uplift the work that is being done by community. So how can I use, my status at McGill University to give credibility and power to what is already being done in the community, because community has the answer. So I'm talking about community organizations, I'm talking about churches, I'm talking about all of those actors who are much closer to the pulse of the issues. I also think that the data is one important thing to think about. And I came into academia through the big quantitative data. My research was on the overrepresentation of, Black children in the child welfare system. But I realized that race-based data is dead data. So it does absolutely nothing to change or to advance the well-being of the Black community. And so we need to move beyond, data that's dead or that's static and collect data that is emancipatory. Sorry, I'm going over, but this emancipatory data is not just that data, right? So what does race mean, if we're not considering the intersections of race with immigration, with class, with ethnicity? And I also think, lastly, I think that was the last point. I just kind of, but yeah. So what I try to do with data is to make sure that that data has to be led by Black researchers. And the reason why the data being led by Black researchers is so important because we have a personal stake in this work. And so it's not just data and research to do research. It needs to be research by and for, and research that has the purpose of emancipation and liberation. Otherwise, it does nothing.
So my work is primarily as a practitioner. I train students who are looking at becoming psychotherapists. I've had the privilege to sit on the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario Complaints and Inquiries Committee. So those of you who are part of CRPO, please don't come and see me for that. I also have to acknowledge my privilege. I've been working for Health Canada for almost 10 years now. And one of the things I've seen in terms of the work that surrounds racialized communities is we have gotten too comfortable. We are just too comfortable, except maybe the people here today. I remember having the opportunity to sit on a funding committee with the Canadian Institute of Health Research for funding. And I was the only Black person in there, and I'm not an academic. And I remember in Calgary when this committee was meeting, there were 4 men and 3 women, and I was the only other Black woman there.
And they were okay to get going with the meeting until I showed up and I said, hey, I'm part of this meeting. We're not going to be making decisions on funding to racialized communities with only one person represented. They were all white people. I say this because if you want to make a difference, you're going to have to fight for what you want. Nothing comes to you easily. Your ability to actually sit in this room in the university, people gave their lives for that. My ability to marry a white man, someone also gave their life for that. So I think we have gotten too comfortable. We are not challenging the systems. We need to raise our voices and raise them to the people at the top. And I think we have a representation problem. The representation problem is at the top. And the people making decisions about our well-being and welfare are people at the top. And these people at the top are white people. So I'm trying to make sense of when we talk about how we're going to move forward. We can't move forward sitting here. You're going to have to challenge the systems that make decisions for you. If you're not challenging systems that make decisions for you, it doesn't matter what kind of data you collect, it's just going to be dead data. So we are challenging systems. A Black psychology section of the Canadian Psychological Association, we are challenging systems. We are actually currently working on challenging the recruitment of the new CEO of our association. We want to know who gets appointed to that position. Some of these positions are appointed positions. We don't elect people anymore. And so we have to actually ask ourselves how we're going to make this work. And we need to be open to challenging some of these systems because, look, these systems were not made for you to thrive. They were made for you to be down where you are. And so we need to come up and challenge these systems. And I don't think, I think we've just been too comfortable. And I was so fortunate to go to that talk about mental health is the church's business. The churches were fighting for so many years, and now we're just so comfortable. But if you take a look at the movement of how we have come to be where we are, it was the religious communities that helped us come through most of our successes. And so we need to start going back to some of these places where we have actually thrived from and start challenging some of these systems. I'm sorry, I'm so tired of being the only Black person in meetings. And use your privilege. I really like what the professor said from Calgary. Use your privilege. You have some of you executive directors. And I think sometimes we get so much afraid. We need to step up and be confident and do the things we're called to do. You know your heart, go with your heart. You're here to help people. You're here to help your own people. So stand up for your people. And I'm sorry, there are consequences. I don't know what we're expecting. If you're really going to fight for something that you really believe in, you're going to definitely face the consequences. And I think sometimes we're just afraid.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Kafui. I'm going to echo that and point out that racism is making us ill. It's making us all ill. It's making us mentally ill. It's making us physically ill. It's robbing us of our happiness, of our joy, of our years of life. And we can't wait for the government to do something about it. We can't wait for Trudeau to say, oh yeah, we should do something about racism, right? We as the Black community who, with origins everywhere, need to come together and say enough. And that means calling it out every time we see it, which is not easy, but you know what? Staying silent is even worse. I'm going to say, as an academic, I have 150 peer-reviewed publications. And I did not get those publications because editors and reviewers said, oh, please send your stuff to us. Please call us out. Please talk about racism. We want to publish your stuff. No, that's not how it happened. The very first paper I submitted to a journal was about racial bias in a popular measure of OCD, which I thought this was incredibly important. The reviewers rejected it and said, this is worthless and really should just be a footnote in somebody else's work. Okay, yeah. Imagine that as a grad student. Fortunately, I had an advisor who's like, no, this is a good paper. And so what I've had to do is call out racism every time I see it in the editorial and peer review process to push my work forward. And just recently, I had a paper that described racism in a professional organization. And I said, I'm going to send this paper to the journal of that professional organization. You know why? So they have to read it. And then they have to give me a good reason for why they're going to reject it, which they did. And I said, okay, you sent this paper to 2 of your editors to review who know nothing about racism. They were unqualified. I insist you send this paper to qualified reviewers who know something about racism. And so they did. And lo and behold, the 3 reviewers loved the paper. And the editor still found a reason to reject the paper. They said, we ran it by our lawyers who want you to remove all of the descriptions in the paper of racism. And if you remove all of the examples, we'll publish your paper. So that's still ongoing, but we have to hold these systems accountable because, again, they're not there for us and we're not going to get what we need just waiting for someone to hand it to us. Thanks.
Merci. Moi, c'est ce que j'ai entendu ici, ça résume généralement ce à quoi on fait face. Au niveau du système, on a encore un système colonialiste, c'est ça la réalité. Avec une approche colonialiste, où des gens pensent et décident pour d'autres personnes. Et malheureusement, c'est ça. C'est à quoi on doit s'attaquer en premier. Alors, les leaders de nos communautés qui sont dans des positions stratégiques, quand tu arrives à une position stratégique, tu comprends pourquoi beaucoup de monde préfère simplement rester dans leur petit cocon tranquille et fonctionner en paix. Parce qu'il y a énormément de blessures auxquelles tu vas faire face. Il y a énormément de luttes que tu vas devoir faire. Mais si personne ne le fait, on n'arrivera jamais à avoir ce qu'on veut à ce niveau-là. Et quelqu'un a parlé tantôt, c'est l'engagement. Et faire la peur, je pense, doit changer de camp dans ce sens-là. L'autre aspect au niveau de nos communautés que moi, je me suis rendu compte, c'est qu'également, il faut aider à ce que les questions de santé mentale, les questions de dépendance troubles concomitants, que ça ne soit plus juste entre les mains des personnes qu'on appelle des experts, mais qu'on ait dans nos communautés des champions, des personnes qui peuvent porter ces combats-là avec ces experts-là pour amener le maximum dans nos communautés à être mieux éduqués, à intégrer ces aspects-là dans le fonctionnement et à pouvoir appuyer ces leaders-là, à pouvoir appuyer aussi ces efforts-là pour qu'on arrive en tant que communauté. Moi, j'en ai marre d'avoir des sauveurs privilégiés autour de moi. J'ai besoin d'alliés forts. Et ces alliés-là ne vont pas me dire comment je vais faire mes choses, mais ils vont marcher avec moi sur comment est-ce que moi, je veux que les choses marchent pour moi-même.
Okay, before we think the audience have something to say, we have a lot of first time here on the table. First Black professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Lyon, first Black professors in the School of Social Work at McGill University, Alicia and Regine. I'm the first one in the School of Psychology at the University of Ottawa. And a year after, we got the chance to have Monnica. I don't know, it is not something to celebrate. I'm sorry, it is not something to celebrate because you are alone. And when they cannot attack you, they attack your students. And they attack them hard. And sometimes you have to think about what you can do to for the mental health of your students And when you pass through this, there's no place to ask what you can do. And you have to pass through this. So it is not something to celebrate. We have just to continue to open the door, have more Black professors, more Black students. And what we are doing now in the School of Psychology at the University of Ottawa, people can be happy of it, but Monica and I, we need more. And we think we can do more. We have to also take care of our mental health as scholars. And that part is also important. And I don't know if one of you or two of you want to tell people, because we have a lot of people here who are advocates for Black people mental health. And there's also the vicariant trauma. And when you are trying to fight the system, you can have yourself, you are at risk to experience mental health problems yourself. When you are the only Black person in a conference, and then you're here, you don't know who to talk to and things like that. It is that easy. And I want to hear from you how you deal, maybe not for you, if you don't want to share, how you deal with the mental health aspect of like fighting the system. I think it is for you, but also to let other people know about how they can continue to be well while fighting the system. Two people.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I feel like, the fighting, we have to fight. We're in this position, we have to fight, but I'm so tired. I'm not just fighting, at the university, but I'm fighting for my kids and their school. Like, I'm fighting this at home. I'm fighting it with my neighbors. I'm fighting it at, in my work. So it's just so exhausting. And so I think, someone earlier mentioned crystals and mentioned ancestors. And I think that's really important. I think having a practice of meditation, exercise, like health. So that's one. I think community is important too. Having those people where you can be with and not censor yourself, where you laugh and you laugh with your belly. The WhatsApp group of your girlfriends or boyfriend, just surrounding yourself with the people that you can say to after a meeting, like, what the, really. And so I'm so privileged that, I have those communities. And if you don't have them, you have to build them. And someone said that, I was the only, person in my faculty, but my students, right? So having students too, playing that role of mentorship, I think is also, I'm learning that that's another space, where I can see, there's something resourceful or resourcing about having, students. And I think also recognizing and mourning the fact that it's not in my generation that I'm going to see the changes that I want to see. And that's very much, borrowed from First Nations communities, Indigenous mentality about, I don't do things for myself. I do them for the generations to follow. So, I'm only going to work, what I can work. I can't work harder than, who and what I can do. And so pace, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and having that perspective.
Non, très, très brièvement, je dirais qu'il y a des luttes qu'on mène, qu'on doit mener au grand jour. Il y en a qu'on doit mener dans l'ombre, la nuit. La nuit. Parce que la résilience, à l'échelle humaine, est aussi un processus discret.
Okay, hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm a social worker and therapist in private practice. And I just want to say thank you for saying that it will be our next generation. I always think about my kids as well and the work I do, but I have to tell you, I'm way older than I look. And you are my next generation. You really are. And when you told me that there's there's 3 of you that work together, or 2 of you, there's 2 of you, there's 3 of you. I went to Ottawa U and got my undergrad here, and then did my my master's of social work at Wilfrid Laurier. I never had anyone Black teach me. So I'm really pleased that you're there. I know you're only 2, and I know you're only 3 or 4, but you're together. And so the way that I think about raising myself up when I'm feeling really fatigued, or I don't want to have to explain why it is you can't touch my hair another time, I think of you. I think of you. I think of moments where I'm in this kind of room with all this beauty and all of this power and presence. And I think of you who are teaching my next generation. Please don't discount that. Please keep going.
So as we continue to discuss like acknowledging mental health in the educational spaces and as educators, I think about certain experiences as like Black students, as students who are practicing social work, or as students who are practicing to help others who are also dealing with their own mental health challenges in silence. Is there truly a space, or is there truly a support as we're acknowledging mental health in all these different spaces? Are we acknowledging the students who are the Black students who are very much experiencing these mental health challenges in our communities? And how, if you are, how are you supporting them? Because we continue to acknowledge, sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional, but we continue to acknowledge kind of the things around us, but so many students are still living in silence. And even having a Black educator still living in silence, because it's still taboo to reach out to your professor about what you're experiencing, and knowing who is actually there supporting you. I think, yeah, so my question is, are you acknowledging this? And if you are, how are you supporting your students?
Thank you for that question. It's really, really important. And so in the 80s, when we were Black students going to university, we were part of an organization called the Cultural Learners Youth Group. And we realized there wasn't Black support at campus. So we started the first Black Student Advising Center at Dalhousie University as that space for Black students to go and feel safe and have counselors right there in that space. We also have Black counselors in our institution, specifically for Black students. So the same way you have the Mental Health and Wellbeing Center, we make sure there's at least 2 Black counselors. And that's saying something for Nova Scotia, because we don't have a large Black population, but we're very intentional in making sure our Black students are supported. And we have, we're starting a Centering Black Health course. And that's just for Black students to come, so they can have a course with just themselves and talk about what they're feeling as they learn about centering Black health. So we're starting that pilot in January, because when students, when they get to be in a space by themselves, they just feel so much release and talking about what they're experiencing in university. So that's a 4-credit course just for Black students that we're starting in January.
Thank you.
Hi. My question would be more so, since we're talking about the future and changing these systems and acknowledging that these systems weren't built for us in the first place. And the position it's put us in as Black people or Black professionals, where we're constantly having to prove ourselves, whether it's in, education, proving yourself to a teacher, proving yourself to a cop that you actually do need help and you're not the threat, proving yourself to a doctor that you are sick, even when your body is, the pain in your body is proof enough, right? So we're always in these positions where we have to prove ourselves, and the system was built that way. but that's actually not true at all. You know, Black people never needed white people. It's actually white people that were so dependent on our labor and our creativity. And looking around this room, we're talking about how, you know, we want to do these research, we want to do this study, we want to do this, that, and the third, but it's the white people in these organizations standing in our way. If we're all qualified in this room, whether you have a PhD from academia or a PhD, you know, in the streets, AKA lived experiences, do you foresee us coming together and really being radical and mobilizing within ourselves to, you know, create what we want instead of trying to change what the system is right now?
Thank you very much for that question. I just want to correct something you said there, because I think we all need each other. So I don't think Black people never needed white people. To be honest with you, I think I've got myself out of trouble just because I have a white husband. Because the system, even though the system was developed in a way for us to actually not thrive, we needed white people to help us along the journey. So when you think about the Underground Railroad, we needed white people as much as we needed indigenous people. So a friend once told me this: boats don't sink because of the water around them. They sink because of the water that gets into them. So when we think about the fact that as a humanity, and I really like what Dr. Daniel spoke about today, the concept of humanity. We are all called to work together for a greater good, period. Somehow along the way, we learned how to treat people badly for the sake of our own selfish needs. We all learned that. And it's not just Black people or white people, we all learned it. However, I think one of the things that comes up though is we need to ask ourselves, the system currently is not serving our people well. What can we do to help change some of these systems that have been put together by the white people who created them? And we were forced to live in them. So I think we go back to the institutions that actually started this, because we have to live and coexist together, whether we like it or not. We have to. So we have to go back to these systems that actually started the problem and convince them to change. We can convince people to change. And it's not about the fact that people may not want to change, but we can actually get in the way of their success. You have to ask yourself, why was the human rights and social justice processes formed in this country? Because some people were being abused by the system. So the same systems that were put together to save other people, we go back to these systems and we challenge them. And I think that's really what I want to say, because I think we have a conception that we don't need some of these processes, but we do need some of these processes to actually help us get back to where we were supposed to be in the first place. A global humanity of people working together. I realize I work really well when I'm with my husband. Oh my God, I realize I'm that smart. And then when he's by himself, he realizes that he doesn't do well by himself. We were made to actually socialize and do good work together. And if you think about that, you'll be more happy to get involved in things that change humanity. Otherwise, you'll be saying to yourself, oh, I'm just fighting for Black people. I'm just fighting for racialized people. Well, I don't get to make that decision because my children are biracial. So my daughter today was saying, you know what? I'm going to hang out with some white people today. I really need the encouragement. And she says, you know what? I am going to fight today. So I'm going to hang out with the Black people. So, you know, there are certain things we really need to be careful around, because we do not want to create a society that is actually just fighting against each other. We want to create a society that works together.
Hi, when I said that we never needed white people, it was from a perspective that it's kind of impossible to seek refuge from your oppressors, right? And we're talking about this boat, but if white people are the people throwing us out the boat, what does the water have to do with anything? You get what I'm saying? And it's true that we all do need each other as humanity, as the world coming together, all that good stuff, but that's not how it really is in real life. It's kind of impossible to expect us to, seek the help and approval of these people who are putting these violent systems in place and upholding it. Like, how long can we wait for their help? How long do I have to prove that we need their help? That doesn't make sense to me. And I just want to clarify that point, that I'm coming from a place where I don't think it's right to try to always change people's minds. And that's not how a lot of, people didn't get out of slavery by trying to change people's minds. They ran away and did what they had to do. You get what I'm saying? So how long do we have to be patient for and be the bigger person and wait for white people to grow up and do the things that they need to do? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, there's so much responsibility on us and having to bring the community together and humanity when it's not us that broke the people in the first place. Like, how much responsibility has to be put on us to fix things when we're not the people who are causing violence? Violence is being caused to us. You get what I'm saying? So, like, I understand that, having like a biracial family and all that can change your perspective. But the reality is the reality. And, whether a white person wants to help you or not, it doesn't really matter, because racism still exists at the end of the day, right? So I just wanted to clarify that piece. Thank you.
Alors, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Steven Louis. En France, je suis psychologue clinicien et psychothérapeute. Je travaille avec des enfants de 3 ans jusqu'à 11 ans dans les établissements scolaires. Et je prépare un doctorat sous la direction de M. Derivois, qui est ici présent. Alors, si j'ai fait ce voyage de Paris à Toronto, de Toronto à Montréal et de Montréal jusqu'à Ottawa, c'est parce que j'ai voulu être témoin, j'ai voulu être présent. J'ai voulu recevoir ce bain que j'appelle un bain spirituel. Parce qu'en France, on ne peut pas travailler sur les communautés, parce que dans la Constitution française, on dit que la France est une république indivisible, donc il n'y a pas de distinction de race, de couleur et autres. Je vous dis tout ça justement parce que j'ai voulu être là pour entendre cette nouvelle perspective qu'en France, on n'a pas. En revanche, j'ai comme entendu sur ce panel un panéliste dire que la peur doit changer de camp. Je pense qu'il faut faire très, très attention. Je ne suis pas en train de vous dire quelle méthodologie donner à votre combat, parce qu'il y a quand même une réalité historique qui légitime des travaux sur la santé mentale des Noirs en Amérique du Nord. Mais je crains qu'on n'est pas en train de mettre en place les ingrédients pour une guerre civile, je ne sais pas, dans les années à venir. Je vous dis ça pour corroborer ce propos. Je me réfère ici à la pensée d'un auteur que j'aime lire, qui s'appelle James Baldwin, qu'on a beaucoup entendu ici dans ce colloque. Il dit la question du racisme est la question de tout le monde. C'est-à-dire, croire qu'on n'est pas raciste, peu importe les communautés, c'est avoir envie d'être rassuré. Et il dit dans ses propos, je mets en défi quiconque ici dans cette salle qui n'a jamais mis quelqu'un dans une case, soit par rapport à sa religion, par rapport à sa couleur de peau, par rapport à son origine culturelle, etc. Donc, je pense, en me basant sur ces propos, sur le propos de James Baldwin, je pense qu'il faut faire très attention. Je ne pense pas que la peur doit changer de camp. Et si la peur doit changer de camp, j'aimerais bien entendre quelle méthodologie, à quoi ça va servir. Merci.
Bon, en fait, moi, ma question se relie peut-être un peu à tout le monde. So I'll say it in English, just for the sake of probably the majority. Frantz Fanon, one of my favorite authors, once said that each generation must find its mission to fulfill it or betray it in relative opacity. And we're talking about, intersections of oppression, AKA intersectionalities, the whole 9 yards. As we go along to challenge and change the system, as we call it, the system, how can we be careful so that we don't get into a slippery slope where the oppressed eventually becomes the oppressor?
Mine is not so much a question as it is a comment. I think I'm hearing a lot of discourse around, just the dichotomy between Black and white. And I just wanted to say, it's a system of white supremacy that's in effect, right? And so white supremacy is a system, it's an ideology, it's something that impacts everyone. And it's a construct that I think dehumanizes white folks from losing that humanity towards other folks. And Black people, it has a real effect on our lived experiences and within every infrastructure and institution that exists. So for me, when I'm hearing conversations around white people this and white people that, and also like, and it is true, for me, I see it as more of, we need to, as a humanity, unite against that system of oppression, which is white supremacy, which has given this falsehood of one group of people is better than another group of people. And I think as a community, I think that could be a way to bridge that conversation. Because again, I don't think we're doing enough to speak about the effects and the insidiousness of white supremacy in the context of the global context of what we're experiencing as well. And that is what I think transports anti-Black racism internationally and globally as well. Because again, anti-Black racism is in every facet around the world. You can see it in every community, in every culture. It's there. It's the one form of racism that you can feel when you go to different places. So I wonder if that could be something that could be discussed a bit more in future panels and conversations.
We have a lot to do, but you want to say something?
Préciser par rapport à l'interpellation, c'est un peu comme la réalité je parlais de la réalité de la peur qui existe dans nos communautés pour beaucoup de monde qui ont l'opportunité d'une promotion sur une table stratégique ou pour avoir un pouvoir de changer les choses, mais qui ont cette peur-là des blessures qui les attendent, disons des enjeux qui les attendent dans le système en termes de combat à mener, en termes de, Jules en parlait tantôt, des répercussions qu'il peut y avoir au niveau de la stabilité, autant biologique, psychologique que sociale. Je parlais de cette peur-là qui gèle beaucoup dans nos communautés, des fois, à aller prendre des postes de responsabilité parce que simplement, ils veulent pas sortir de ce confort-là disons, de ne pas faire face. Parce que les personnes qui ont des privilèges ne lâchent pas leurs privilèges de façon très, disons, sur un plateau d'or. Le changement arrive avec des inconforts. Le changement arrive avec des combats. Moi, je dis souvent aux gens, aux États-Unis, à côté, il y a eu Martin Luther King. Il avait son approche. Mais il y a eu aussi Malcolm X et il avait son approche. Donc, l'un n'est pas meilleur que l'autre pour moi. Chacun a fait sa part de la job pour qu'on arrive à là où on est arrivé. C'était ça mon message.
Puis, pour peut-être compléter, vous voulez compléter ça exactement ou autre chose? Non, allez-y. Non, Alicia voulait compléter. Alicia, allez-y.
I just wanted to say that it's not an either or. And I like that comment about binary. We need to build and we need to rebuild. So we need to do two things at the same time. We need to create spaces, new spaces, and we also need to reform the spaces that exist. We are all healing from racial trauma, white supremacy. As Black people, we need Black spaces where we can heal in our way of healing. We need to have white spaces where they can heal from their, trauma. And then we need to have spaces where we can come together. So we should not be thinking about things in binary terms personally. And so I really agree with your comment.
Please make some noise for our panelists and speakers. First, we have awards for students for the posters. We have a great jury with Betsy Johnson, Daniel Derivois, Barbara-Ann Hamilton, Regine King, and Mamadou from the PIAC, Public Health Agency of Canada, and also Sylvie from the Public Health Agency of Canada. And I'm sorry, but they elected two of my students first and second places. So I think it is not fair. So we will see with them. It was Wina first and Leslie second, but you can applaud them. But you will not have it. The lab will give you exactly the same amount, exactly the same. But for the conference, I think it is better to have people like who are not from the lab. I'm sorry, guys. For the third place, Summer Night. Make some noise for Summer, baby. That will encourage her. Second, Petra Owusu. Where is Petra? There's a good surprise on it. Stay here. First place, Alicia Fannon. I think she was like she has a fight for Toronto, so she couldn't wait. So I'm sorry, but we will be in touch. Some closing remarks from the director of the School of Psychology, and then the last words will be for me.
I didn't know I was doing closing remarks. I thought I was just giving out prizes. All right. Well, as I said in my opening remarks, I really want to thank everyone for coming. And as I pointed out in my opening remarks, for this absolutely necessary conference, not just important, but necessary. It has been a rewarding experience, I'm sure, for all the participants. It's been a rewarding experience for me as an experimental psychologist, for me as an administrator, because I'm hearing ideas. And what I'm always open to is ideas. And please share ideas with people like me. As I pointed out, I'm fully aware of my privilege. I'm here to cheer on ideas as an administrator and think of new ways of doing things, acknowledging within the system, as was raised earlier. So I just want to really thank everyone. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing knowledge that you have with others, with people here. And I hope you had an extremely rewarding experiences. So, merci tout le monde.
Thank you, Chris. First, I want some noise for all our speakers. Thank you to all of them. It was an amazing experience. I want some noise from Wina. Where is Wina? Wina, you can come. Wina, come, please. Wina, Katsi, and Schwab, you can come. Wina, Katsi, and Schwab. Our research coordinators. Wina is our research coordinator in the lab, Schwab in the center, and Kari also from the Interdisciplinary Center for Black Health. Please make some noise for them. A lot of people told me like, oh, that is good, but you have a good team. Sure, we have a really, really good team. And I don't know how I can thank them, but guys, thank you. And the fact that I said to them today, like, I want I want them like to be in the lab or in the center for the next 2 years when we will organize this conference, because I want we not to enter to a graduate program to become a clinical psychologist as she wants, but also Kathy. So Schwab is doing his PhD in health population, and maybe in 2-3 years, he will be a new professor. But we also have a team of volunteers. They are not all here, but I want some notes for them, and I will ask them to come here. Please come, all the volunteers, please come. Please come, please come. We have also the communication team, Paris. The communication team, come. You see a lot of messages on Twitter and things like that. A lot of people tell me like, oh, you are very active on Twitter and Instagram. The fact that I don't know the password of our account. So I want to note the presence of someone. 3 years ago, we received an email from a girl, a Black girl. Hello, I just complete your survey. Can I be part of it, of your team? I said, oh, it is impossible. Like, she's 16. What we can do? Nothing. And we meet and we say, oh, we already have some people, young people in the consultative committee, advisory committee. Maybe we can have another one. And we include her. 1 year after, she asked to do a practicum in the lab. And we accept. Now she's a student in first year in psychology. And she did an incredible work. And if you saw Wina came to tell me, do not forget someone, it was her. Kathy, I make some noise for Kathy. Come, let people know you. And it is really something for me. And it is like something that is paternalized. You say that in English, paternalized? Okay. Because I saw her like during the conference, and each day I said, okay, you do all of this, it is great, but for the PhD program, we need a 9-point GPA. So please, all of this, but a 9 GPA. But I think we need people like her, and we need to celebrate young people, Black young people like her, like who want to do things, who want to do the changes, and who try to implicate themselves. Please make some noise for my team. I will finish by saying, in 2 years, I do not speak about this to the lab members or to the Interdisciplinary Center for Black Health members, and I see Monica here. But I think we need to continue this work. It cannot be just one conference on Black mental health and that's it. We need to do another one. We learn from a lot of things happen here, and we need to do another one. And I think we are not victim, as Toni Morrison said, because we choose to do not victim. We refuse to be a victim. James Baldwin said,
do you see? He called everybody. He didn't call me himself.
No. No, no, not important, not important, very important. No, it's not important. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's not important. It's not important. It's not important. You make me. I'm sorry.
In the name,
I don't want
in the
more.
name of everybody, I want to say, Dr. Sena, thank you.
Oh, please, no. I don't want more. I'm sorry. I don't want more. You make me so emotional. And I want to be emotional. James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Let's face things. Let's try to change things. If we can do this conference, we can also change things. Now, I invite you to be fighters, fight for yourself, fight for your mental health, fight for our future, our children. Thank you. I'm sorry. I want also some noise for our translators, but also the technicians. Thank you.